Quebec is once again at the center of Canada's most dangerous question. Could this country break apart? For decades, the word separation has hovered like a storm cloud over Canadian politics. Many thought that after the 1995 referendum, the threat was gone for good. But today, under Prime Minister Mark Carney's leadership, the issue is back and it's rising faster than anyone expected. And the timing couldn't be worse because the United States under President Donald Trump is watching closely, ready to turn Canada's turmoil into America's gain. So let's dig into this. What exactly is happening in Quebec right now? Why are people whispering once again about independence? And most importantly, how close are we to another separation crisis? It starts with economics. Quebec's leaders are pointing to Ottawa and accusing Carney's government of failing to protect the province's financial interests. The energy policies designed to win favor in Western Canada are being seen in Quebec as punishments: higher costs, more taxes, and less federal investment flowing back east. The sense of unfair treatment is feeding into something deeper, something historical. The feeling that Quebec has always been fighting to preserve its unique culture, language, and identity inside a country that often misunderstands it. You don't have to look far to see how real this tension is. Polls are showing rising support for sovereignty, not a majority yet, but numbers that are far higher than they've been in years. Younger Quebecers who once leaned toward integration and globalism are now talking about independence in terms of empowerment, of reclaiming control over their destiny. And when young people start to embrace a cause like this, history tells us it doesn't just fade away. It builds. Now, here's where things get even more dangerous. Quebec's provincial government isn't shying away from the topic. Several ministers are openly questioning whether Ottawa under Carney can be trusted to respect Quebec's autonomy. They're framing it as a matter of survival, not just politics. And once that narrative takes hold, the path to a referendum doesn't look like a wild fantasy. It starts to look like an inevitability. Mark Carney, of course, knows this. He's walking a tightrope. On one hand, he can't afford to look weak, especially with Western provinces also pushing back on federal authority. But on the other hand, pushing Quebec too hard could push the province right out of the country. And here's the chilling truth. The moment Quebec holds another vote, Canada as we know it could be finished. Let's not forget the history. In 1995, the country came within a hair's breadth of losing Quebec. 50.6% voted no. 49.4% voted yes. A difference of less than 1%. That's how close Canada came to breaking apart. One more push, one more spark, and it could have happened. Imagine waking up the day after that vote and realizing that the map of your country had permanently changed. That nightmare scenario is back on the table. And this time, the global stakes are even higher. President Trump has made it clear he's not shy about exploiting Canada's divisions. Sources in Washington suggest that U.S. officials are already studying how Quebec's independence movement could create new trade opportunities, new alliances, and yes, new ways to weaken Ottawa's influence. If Quebec leaves, Trump would be the first to step in with offers of deals, investments, and political support. That's how serious this is. It's not just about Canada's unity, it's about Canada's survival as a strong, independent nation on the world stage. Now, let's talk about the cultural side of this because it matters just as much as the politics. Quebec has always been different. French-speaking, proud, protective of its heritage. For decades, federal governments have tried to balance that identity with the broader Canadian project. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but right now, there's a feeling in Quebec that the balance has tipped too far, that Ottawa has forgotten what makes Quebec unique. And when people feel ignored, when they feel pushed aside, that's when movements for independence grow. What's adding fuel to this fire is the rise of new political voices in Quebec who aren't afraid to say the word separation out loud. They're not apologizing for it. They're not framing it as a last resort. They're framing it as a goal, a dream worth chasing. That kind of boldness hasn't been seen in Quebec politics for years, and it's catching on. So where does this leave Carney? He's facing a ticking clock. If he acts too slowly, the movement gains momentum. If he acts too aggressively, Quebecers might see it as proof that Ottawa doesn't respect them. Every decision he makes now will be judged not just in English Canada, but through the very particular lens of Quebec nationalism. And one wrong move could be catastrophic. But let's not forget something else. Separation wouldn't just affect Quebec and Ottawa, it would affect every single Canadian. Economically, politically, socially, nothing would be untouched. The Canadian dollar would plunge, international investors would panic, trade agreements would be thrown into chaos. And what about the millions of Canadians with roots in Quebec or families split across provinces? Overnight, people would be asking, am I still Canadian? Is my passport still valid? What happens to me if my province decides to leave? And here's a question few are daring to ask, but everyone is thinking, what if Quebec actually votes yes this time? Would Ottawa even let it happen? Would the Canadian government recognize the result, or would it fight to hold the country together by any means necessary? That uncertainty alone could lead to protests, unrest, even violence in the streets. We're not there yet, but the road ahead is pointing straight toward confrontation. Meanwhile, Trump is watching. The U.S. president has never been one to hide his opinions on Canadian politics. If Quebec leaves, Trump could step in with promises of new trade corridors, energy partnerships, and military ties. Imagine a North America where Quebec has direct deals with Washington, bypassing Ottawa entirely. That would shake the foundations of Canada's relationship with the U.S., and once again, Carney would be forced to fight for Canada's place in the world. The truth is, we are entering uncharted territory. Quebec's rising nationalism is not just another round of political theater, it's a real, growing movement fueled by economic frustration, cultural pride, and a belief that history is giving them another chance. Carney is trying to calm the waters, but even his allies admit the storm is building faster than expected. There's another layer to this crisis that almost nobody is talking about: Indigenous nations inside Quebec. Many of these communities, especially in the north, have already said they would refuse to follow Quebec into independence. They argue that their treaties are with Canada, not with Quebec, and that if Quebec can break away, then so can they. Imagine that. Quebec declares independence only to face its own separation crisis from within. That would shatter the image of a clean break and plunge the region into an even deeper constitutional nightmare. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Some Indigenous leaders have hinted they might turn directly to Washington if they feel abandoned by Ottawa or Quebec City. In other words, Trump wouldn't just be watching from the sidelines, he could suddenly find himself with new partners inside Canadian territory, eager to cut their own deals. That possibility alone would send shockwaves across Canada. Add to this the fact that global powers like China and Russia have been quietly monitoring Canada's internal divisions for years. A weakened, fractured Canada would be easier to pressure on trade, resources, and Arctic sovereignty. If Quebec separates, it's not just a domestic issue, it's an international opportunity for every rival power that would like to see Canada knocked off balance. So, is Canada facing another separation crisis? All the signs are pointing in that direction. It may not explode tomorrow or next week, but the ingredients are all there: rising anger, political leaders pushing the boundaries, economic grievances, and a U.S. president eager to stir the pot. For Canadians watching this unfold, the question is no longer whether Quebec might ask the question again. The real question is, if Quebec does, how will the rest of the country respond? Will Canadians rally together to keep this nation united, or will we wake up one morning and find that the map of Canada has been redrawn forever? One thing is certain, this story is just beginning. The stakes are higher than they've ever been. And whether you live in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, or Vancouver, Quebec's rising movement will shape your future too. Because if Canada cracks at its core, nothing will ever be the same again.